You're listening to the Valley Current.
Oh, you're all dressed up. Welcome into the Valley Current, Dr. Jonathan Buckheit. I'm so happy to finally get you on the air. It's only been like a few months or years that I've asked you to do this. And you're at home, sheltered down, right? In a beautiful office there.
I've been home since mid-March, Jack.
And you are super productive because Atherton, where you live, I won't give the address, is extremely fast internet, the fastest on earth, certainly in California, right?
I don't know about that. We do have 1 gig internet now. I told you about that. You get it in Portola Valley yet?
No. Are you kidding me? We're like in the Stone Ages. You have to get trenches cut. My neighbor got so fed up with the internet, he spent like $10,000 getting a trench cut so AT&T could run the line.
Oh, my.
And he's closer to wherever the main artery is. So they said, for you, it'll cost like $30,000 because we're at the top of the hill.
Ooh.
And we're like, what? And there's like, yeah, you want an AT&T fiber line? Yeah, we can put it in. That's what it's going to cost you.
I guess I got lucky because I'm only paying $50 a month for a 1 gig bidirectional line.
The whole company there. That's extremely cheap. I mean, I don't even know how they're making a profit on that.
I had to pay to run the line, but it's considered an improvement to the home.
Right.
But they're making money.
That makes the home extremely more marketable because if you're at all sort of savvy to what sells homes, fast internet is part of the game now.
Allegedly. There are a lot of Google executives living here, including the founders and the former, and Google laid fiber years ago for them.
Oh,
so they've had
really?
it for a long time. That's the rumor. That's the rumor.
So you're like me. You're a New Yorker. I want to say you grew up in Queens and I grew up in Brooklyn, or do I have that backwards?
No. I was born in Brooklyn, and I went to high school in Manhattan.
Okay.
And I came out to California in 1992. Seems like yesterday, but it's almost 30 years ago.
You're way too young. You don't even look like you're in your 30s. It's shocking.
To go to graduate school at Stanford.
And you already had a master's degree from?
No, bachelor's. I had bachelor's in math and physics. And I
from Michigan, right? Am I remembering this right?
Right. And I got a master's and PhD from Stanford, but it was all part of the same program where after 1 year you get your master's and then you get your PhD.
Right, because we intersect in a few ways. I want to tell you, so I was born in Queens and grew up in Brooklyn and then went to school both in Brooklyn and the Graduate Center in Manhattan. My high school was in Brooklyn on Shore Road. You may remember Severian. They're still out there. It was an all-boys
Catholic school.
Catholic school, very strict, very, Jesuit, very like, we're going to really force things to be like learn 4 years of Latin, 4 years of Spanish. The really successful people had 4 years of Russian, and the super successful had 4 years of Chinese. Like literally 4 languages at the same time.
Back then, really? Chinese?
I couldn't do it. I mean, I just was like overextended. I was working in my dad's store. It's a long, long story. It's painful to think about it because if you have Russian and Chinese, man, you are super marketable today.
For sure.
But I came out, so I got the master's degree in as part of the bachelor's degree in New York, and then I came out for law school and stayed in California from law school in the 1970s. So I'm like 20 plus years older than you or ahead of you. And there's nothing like California weather, but I want to talk about kind of your journey because here's the other intersection. I went for about sort of 2 semesters to the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor in advanced computing and statistics. And there was a guy I met in the law school that you probably maybe met named Lehman Allen. Professor Lehman Allen was the inventor of a logic game that taught both mathematicians as well as computer programmers as well as lawyers how to use symbolic logic.
No, what year was this, Jack?
This was like 1975, 76.
Ooh. Yeah.
So you weren't even
I did
born
not know
yet.
him.
You weren't even born
I
yet.
was born.
Were you? That's hard to believe. You look so young, man. Whatever you're doing, So your journey was in 92, you come out to Stanford, and that's the heyday of the growing, beginning of the internet starting to sort of become real, right? Back then.
Yes. I think that so let me tell you that there's a lot of interesting experiences at Stanford. It was a great experience. I would say it was also a very stark experience getting thrown in there, and they had very rigid and rigorous requirements of what they wanted one to do. And it was very competitive. But I collaborated on writing software with my advisor and with several other students that we published on the internet. And at the time, we created what may have been the first website at Stanford to actually publish this software.
Wow.
So yeah, it was very early days, and it was hard to, some people had the foresight to really see how it was going to go. But yes, I would say that Stanford, that was sort of when Stanford was pivoting to become very entrepreneurial in the next 10 years.
Well, Stanford, I think, realized there were a lot of people that were getting behind the internet as more than just an exchange between academics, colleges, and military and government, because the internet really started from DARPA.
ARPANET, yeah.
Yes. So people don't remember that story. I'm old enough to tell a little bit of it because I remember very early on people saying this is going to change people's lives. And people are like, people are going to want to use the telephone. They're not going to want to type. It's completely the opposite now. No one gets on the telephone anymore. Everyone wants to use text messaging or email. Seriously.
As you well know from an investment, Jack, right?
Yeah, no, it's true. And you're doing a big business now, and you should probably talk about that at some point. But I want to talk about your journey because you're a very entrepreneurial academic that chose entrepreneurship over the academy. You could have taught, and you probably still can teach because you look so young, and people would say, oh, it's a young professor. If you were like me, they'd say, well, what do you mean you're a professor? You're too old. You should be retired at this point.
Okay. Yeah. So I would say that in the program I was in, when I entered it, the expectation was that most people getting a PhD would go into academics. And I think that started to change just about the time I came to Stanford, which interestingly enough, was right around the time that Stanford really started admitting a very international student body also. So it was maybe 2 or 3 years after mainland China started allowing students to come to the United States.
It was a big movement, and it paid a lot of the freight at Stanford because those people pay full price, right? Don't they?
No,
not
when I was there.
They got scholarships too, like
yes.
You?
Yes.
Wow.
Every person who was admitted to that doctoral program received a fellowship, and they didn't have to pay. And you were a teaching assistant, and you got living expenses. And that was if you were in the PhD program, not the master's program.
Okay.
And it made no differentiation where you were from.
Okay.
But yeah, so at the time I was finishing up, it was possible for me to go into academics. I thought, frankly, Jack, it was too political for me. There was just I didn't really know what it was. I had some experience working summers. I worked for 2 Wall Street companies on 2 summers doing mathematical programming for them. And I didn't like working in that environment either. And I didn't really know why. But now I think I recognize it as more of an entrepreneurial spirit where I really wanted to be doing my own thing. And
well, when you're working for a big Wall Street firm, there's a lot of rules and regulations. It's kind of like working for the government, right? Isn't it?
You might say, although when I was there, it didn't appear that all those rules and regulations were being followed, because my very first week when I was coming back from lunch, there was a big commotion in the lobby, and Rudolph Giuliani at the time was the U.S. attorney for New York. This is pre-mayor, and he was leading out someone in handcuffs who had just been arrested for the whole, it was quite a spectacle. And that weighed a little bit in my decision. It was very memorable. And the president of the company was running alongside him, telling him, "We're going to get you out very quickly. Don't worry about it." And the guy was crying.
You learned early about it, corporate indemnification clauses and how important they are, right?
Yes, I guess so. But yeah, that was an interesting place in the sense that really all they cared about was, are you making money for the company?
Right.
And
right.
there was, and on the other end of that extreme, I would say in academics, a lot of it, of course, is based on what are you doing and your research or whatnot, but it's also a very collegial environment, and how you fit in and interact is all very important.
Right.
So probably entrepreneurism was for me, and fairly quickly after graduating, I started my business.
Which you were one of the first really successful young PhD Stanford, because we see a lot of PhDs from Stanford that completely flop. And you completely succeeded in an area that was intensely competitive. We represented your business for a long time, the first one I think to talk about. But basically, you made a great success out of something that was in a, you're like this butterfly with a bunch of friggin' ginormous dinosaurs whacking in the air at each other, right? That's the way I think of the area.
Well, yes. So when this was in the semiconductor space,
right, which is tough. Tough business. Yeah,
and when I started the business in 1997, it was a very high growth area.
Yes.
Silicon was hot.
Yes.
And over the 10 years of running and operating that business, the semiconductor industry became more and more commoditized.
Right.
And more price-based.
Yes.
And as that evolution took place, it got nasty, I would say, in terms of how does a small company actually with a product that's valuable get commercially compensated for that product.
Right. Even when you have a signed contract, even when you have history of performance and payment, and even when there shouldn't be what might be called ethical lapses by big corporations that have these big policies about how honest and fair they are to their vendors, and you discover, what the heck, you have bought 10 seats and you're using it on 1,000 seats? Give me a break, right?
It was more nuanced to them. We had a license manager that counted seats. It was more like, you bought it for this factory, and I tried to sell you on a corporate-wide license at the very beginning, and we were told, let's see how it goes. And the license agreement said the software was just for that one facility, and we would discover everyone in the company is VPNing into a server at that one facility to use the software.
Right. Because some bean counter is saying we could save $50,000 a year if we do this, or a lot more.
Maybe. I never really got on the inside to know that. It could just be they bought the software and they're like, here you go, use it. And there wasn't real training in what the parameters of the license entailed. I do know that when we would contact them and say, it appears that you're outside the scope of what you bought, can we get that rectified with an additional purchase? I did not get a warm reception.
Right. I mean, you could argue that this is a form of blatant corporate piracy, and we tried a lot of cases for you and set a lot of good precedents. I remember a number of them that were just funny to remember, kind of how these companies squirm when you finally put them under the gun, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think you won every case, Jack, and a lot of them never went that far because the company settled up prior to that, but they squirm. But the attitude from, learning from the legal system point of view from a lot of the judges or arbitrators was, you're a big company, they're a small company, you're using the product, you should be paying for it. So in terms of how it was viewed, was probably pretty favorable for the position we were in.
Right. And you, as a young entrepreneur, PhD from Stanford, had a lot of credibility. I remember juries loved you. Judges loved you. Arbitrators loved you. Mediators loved you. I mean, you were the great face of that company because you were the founder, the inventor. You were everything. And you had a big team behind you, but it wasn't that big, right?
Well, we had a lot of people in China. I was one of the first Silicon Valley companies, by the way, Jack, to open up in China in a big way.
Right.
In the early 2000s, because, we just couldn't afford to compete paying 100 engineers in Silicon Valley to write this software.
Right.
There's a lot of technology in that software, as you know.
Right, but did you think, I mean, the name of the company was Yield Dynamics. The code was ydyn.com. I don't know
That
if
was a
that's
website, yeah.
I don't know if that goes anywhere. I guess I should check to see where it goes now. Does it go somewhere now these days?
Let's see.
YDYN?
I'm checking
I'm
right
going to
now.
guess it. I'm going to guess it routes somewhere at this point because it was such an amazing small company that was doing very innovative things on yield, and yield is pretty important to semiconductor processing, right?
Right. I'm just, for the benefit of all the readers, essentially, coming from a statistical background, what we were doing is collecting all of the data that would get generated when a computer chip company tries to make a chip, and using that data to improve what's being made. By the way,
Right.
the website doesn't seem to go anywhere. It's just hanging, Jack.
Yeah, that's weird.
But the software's still there. It's bought by a company that sold it to another company. It's still around.
Yeah.
And, as you remember, a lot of the companies would even admit, yes, we saved $100 million with this software last year, but that doesn't mean we're going to pay you for it because we don't think we have to. Literally, that's what one of the companies said. I'm not going to name the company, in a mediation we were in.
Yeah, and so you were one of the few people that really would not just cow to big law or big corporate abuse. You would actually stand up for your rights. A lot of companies don't. But you're one of the few people that said, look, I'm not walking away from this. I'm going to basically deal with this in the way it needs to be dealt with. That's the way I remember kind of this history. It's obviously a number of years ago because you've since sold the company and very successfully exited, and you're on to other things that we'll talk about. But basically, you really had a licensing enforcement campaign that you did quite well with.
Well, I had a choice. It was either do that or be in a poorhouse. So I decided we had to enforce the license. And there are some others who were, you remember Ivan Pesek? He was doing it in the semiconductor industry from the EDA perspective. Interestingly enough, when I sold the company, the acquiring company remarked, they said, you have a lot of revenue coming from license enforcement, and we're just not accustomed to that. We would think maybe that should be 5% of the business tops, and it was a significantly higher amount. And I actually found a Gartner or a DataQuest study, and I don't know if you remember, but Oracle, what percentage of their software revenue would you say actually comes from enforcement rather than normal sales activities?
Well, I know that data because I know that Oracle is very aggressive, and I wouldn't be surprised if they're up to 60 or 70% coming from enforcement and the rest from new licensing. I wouldn't be surprised.
In 2007, it was very close to that number.
Yeah, it's
it was
amazing,
in the high
right?
50s. Yes.
I mean, it's an amazing statement that these companies get so entrenched that a lot of the way in which they actually have to go out and get revenue is by going out and going back to what would otherwise be, quote unquote, a happy customer and say, look, the reality is that you owe us a bunch of money, and we're not going to just accept the fact that you say go away. We're not going away. I mean, that's a reality, right?
Yeah, probably that's why I imagine a lot of the industry's gone to subscription-based software now, because a lot of that nastiness goes away when you have the subscription model. But on the perpetual license model, you also have to remember, in the semiconductor industry, there were not thousands of customers. There were maybe 30, 40, tops 50 big semiconductor companies in the world that we could sell to. So if a lot of them were buying half the volume that they were actually using, that just materially changed the complexion of the business.
Right.
We couldn't afford to write the software anymore.
Yeah, I mean, your available market in many ways was not that many companies, but you did have the potential for some very, very big deals from those companies, right?
Yeah, yes.
And so when you look at that journey of growing a company from scratch, starting it from scratch, my recollection is you didn't take big venture capital. You were you bootstrapped yourself pretty well, is my recollection.
I had some initial angel investors. Actually, believe it or not, Mark Benioff was an angel investor in the company.
Yeah, the guy at Salesforce that's a billionaire now. Absolutely.
Right. And but no traditional venture capital. I'm very happy I didn't.
But you grew it. I mean, you grew it in a very nice kind of way. You could argue that you kept it very manageable. You didn't do any crazy stuff that you see some of these companies do, right? Crazy advertising, crazy marketing, crazy gimmicks. You didn't do any of that stuff. Right?
It was all meat and potatoes type of stuff, Jack. There were a lot of trips to Japan. I've been to Japan well over 100 times, probably close to 200 times. Some years I was going to Japan every week I'll tell you a story that's very interesting, and this goes back to New York. But when I started the company, I was introduced to a gentleman named Ken Levy. You probably know of him or have met him, right?
Yes.
He's the founder of KLA.
Right.
KLA, very successful.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right. He was KLA. He merged with Tencor.
Right. We represented Tencor years ago. We represented KLA Tencor after the merger. We know those folks, right?
Okay. So I was introduced to him. He and I actually went to the same high school in New York, Stuyvesant High School, and he gave me some tips as an entrepreneur, and I still remember them. It was very, very good advice. I ran into him last year at a restaurant, actually. But one of the things he said to me stuck with me. He said, the amount of success you're going to have is directly related to the amount of time you spend with customers. You.
Right.
Don't just send other people. You have to go and do it.
Right.
So I did it. And I would go to Japan because, a salesperson would be much more willing to make a concession than I would be. I would rather steer the customer into, can we do additional technology for you and keep the money the same? So I spent a lot of time there. But yeah, it was basically just creating products, servicing customers, and seeing customers. There were no gimmicks to the company.
Right. And you guys, I actually found while you were talking, I was listening to you, but I was also finding the Wayback Machine just to show you, to take you into sort of the old history. That was the simple website that you had back in the day. We're talking early 1990s, I think, or late 90s. Yeah, 1999. We have the date. There's the date, September 99. Right. Simple, straightforward. You might say this is like the Google approach. Very, very simple press releases, very simple. And, you don't have all the busyness that you see on all the websites these days. And it's a little bit like a brochure. That's all it is. You don't see anything else. You're just looking at it from the point of view. There's the symbols. And you might say that symbol represents what you're trying to do. You're trying to increase yield over time with continuous improvement. Is that a fair summary of what you were doing?
Yes, that was our first logo.
Right. And it's in many ways, that simplicity is stunningly acceptable, but not often used by many companies, although Google is pretty much stuck with the real estate that they use. That first page that comes up has stayed the same for what seems like
we got a graphic designer to do a fancy logo if you go further into the history. But yes, right. That was what the early version of the website looked like.
So John, you successfully do an M&A deal. You successfully exit. There's probably a non-compete. I forget all the details. I think there was. I forget. You get through all that.
But not that I had any interest in continuing on in that industry.
Right. So then what do you do? Because now you're the CEO of another company in a very, very different field. So tell us how you traverse that.
Well, so today I'm the CEO of a company called Friend Finder, which some people know, probably a lot of people know.
It was ahead of Match.com, I want to say.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
It was the first online dating site.
You guys were like the first out there.
We were the first.
Yep.
And this also came out of Stanford with a classmate of mine, Andrew Conru.
Right.
Who invented online dating.
Right.
Actually, we invented a lot of the technology, like, for example, the Amazon affiliate link.
Yes.
They borrowed from us. We actually use that in a much more widespread way than they did, probably 6 months earlier than they did.
Jeff Bezos owes you about $1 billion for that, or maybe $1 trillion. Seriously.
Something like that.
It's it's a huge innovation. It's a mega innovation.
Right. There was a lot of innovation at Friend Finder. And interestingly enough, Friend Finder was sold probably the same week that Yield Dynamics was sold in 2007, November. And, but Friend Finder was sold on a partial promissory note that didn't get paid back. So in late 2013, the original owner of the company and owners got the company back. And I became the CEO about a year later. And I've been doing that ever since and really been enjoying it because it's a consumer company. It's technology. It's internet. I've learned a lot about payment processing and how that's done in this day and age. And, it's a great group of people that I enjoy working with.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a huge, really, traversal there because you're going from a B2B, business to business, licensing, signed agreement model to a business to consumer, not ink signed, but electronically signed deal, where a lot of it is putting a credit card number in is really what represents the true affirmation. You must have a lot of looky-loos, particularly now where people are like staying at home and wanting entertainment, and they say, oh yeah, I'll sign up, but they don't put their credit card in, right? Isn't that part of the problem or the challenge in a business like that, business to consumer?
No, we have a lot of people putting the credit cards in during this time, Jack.
Okay.
The business has been doing well. I don't know if you ever looked at the interview that I did with Rolling Stone magazine about online dating.
I did a while ago. That's an interview from a number of years ago, right?
A couple of years ago.
Yeah.
But one of the reasons we believe that a lot of people continue giving us money after 20 years for our product is it's a real product. The real scandal with a lot of online dating sites is that some of them actually create fake profiles themselves to lure, for example, a gentleman into paying for a membership, thinking that he's corresponding with some beautiful woman. And I've actually been in the rooms in the Philippines where these chat agents are in, typing to him. And we've never done that. We don't believe in that.
Well, you're saying this is like the future of, what is it called, Westworld, where these bots are operating in real time and pretending like they're people, but they're not really people?
Well, except on Westworld, the women actually look like women were attractive. And these bots, not the case necessarily.
My name is Stormy. You'll love me. Send me money.
Exactly. So we've never done that, and we have a loyal customer base based on that. We probably could have made more money at certain points in time if we had done that, but we think over the long term, a far better approach is to do the right thing by the customer. One thing I've always believed in, Jack, whether it's at Yield Dynamics or Friend Finder, is really delivering a quality product and experience to the customer.
And you've got the PhD from Stanford to actually understand what quality means, because you know how to use regression analysis around debugging software, and that's really the tool that people still use, right? Don't they?
Well, let me put it like that. We have a lot of data analytics in what we do in Friend Finder. We have millions of people using the site, and we are able to use data science and analytics to determine what things on the site work, what don't, what could be improved. We could test things on the site and really create the best customer experience for the users.
Right, and you guys,
in a real-time way.
Yeah, and you guys are always up 7x24, 365 days a year, like nonstop, right?
Internet never sleeps, Jack.
Right, and so the money should come in almost like a ka-ching, ka-ching over and over again, and it's almost like potential unlimited growth as you reach other users in even other countries, right?
Yeah, I mean, Friend Finder, by the way, used to have the largest dating site in China called Asia Friend Finder. And until the government of China blocked us.
Really?
Because they didn't like the optics of Chinese women meeting a foreign husband on a website and leaving the country. They thought it was disrespectful to the concept of their country in China. So we were blocked in China. But there are a lot of emerging markets that we can go into. You know, a similar concept to YDI and Friend Finder is the notion that now we're competing versus free. Okay. There are free sites like Tinder and whatnot that purport to do the same thing.
Right.
And at Yield Dynamics, we had competitors like, you know, Ken Levy's company, KLA. They had competitive software. They were a multi-billion-dollar public company. In some cases, Jack, they would offer to give the software to the customer for free.
Right.
Just to maintain the footprint at that. So how could I compete with free stuff from a multi-billion-dollar company? The product didn't just have to be better. The product had to be dramatically better, just knock your socks off type of better.
Right.
And we think the same thing is true at Friend Finder. We just have to really deliver a product and a community that is so much better and so much more unique than what you can get elsewhere, that customers are willing to pay for it, because it takes a lot of money to support and maintain that.
Right. I mean, it's not only sort of the software, but you got huge content. I mean, there's huge content management that you have to also police for all sorts of other reasons too, right?
We police it 100% by human review. We're very unique in that. So we manually review every piece of content that goes on the site. It takes hundreds of people, it takes a lot of money. But again, we want to have an environment that is legal, protective, people feel comfortable, and we think that's really the only way to do it.
So let me ask you, when you see kind of the arc of your career, you've now spanned business to business, you're spanning business to consumer. What's the next challenge? You're going to run for government, for office? Because I imagine you would do really well as the mayor of Atherton.
No. Definitely not. I have no interest in that. But, you know, the best way I can answer the question is, when I was in graduate school, if you would have told me I would have been running my own company, I would have said, I don't see that. But yet that happened. And if someone would have told me I'd be the CEO of a dating and entertainment company, I would have said, boy, you're way off. But yet here I am. So I really cannot predict, other than to say it's probably pretty sure not going to be, I don't think my strength would lie in that area. I'm good at products, at creating competitive products, creating good business structures and management. That's where I think that I should focus my profession.
Well, you have another value that you haven't expressed, because I've seen you do this. You're actually a very expert mediator. You can identify the moving parts in a dispute. I've seen you do this in lots of different cases, and you're not technically selling mediation services, but I've seen you in the licensing context where there's so many differing interests, bridge the differences and say, I know you guys need this and we need this and somebody else needs that. And I'm sure you must do that all the time with your employees. That's a lot of the role of a CEO these days, is like a super mediator, right?
Absolutely. So dealing with personnel and motivating them and coming up with compromises, but also I'd like to think that probably I developed some of those skills by getting out there and learning how to do sales at Yield Dynamics, because I was never trained in doing sales, Jack.
Right.
And believe me, there are plenty of people who said, whatever you do, don't send John out to a customer to sell something. Keep him in the office on the technology. But
he's not going to reduce the price. He doesn't want to hear the word discount.
Right. You know, so it's possible for people to learn and see. I think it's very important to see options and see possibilities. There are very often many more options and many more possibilities than people think there are to solve an issue or solve a problem.
Right. I mean, it's fundamentally a creative process. A lot of people don't have that skill. You have it. But if we had to wrap up on, how are you dealing with this COVID-19? It looks like you've adjusted well, and you've got this fast internet right there in your home office, and your people are all wired in. Are you able to run this company essentially virtually at this point, like 7x24, 365, no problemo?
Yes, we are. I mean, I'm very proud of the team. When we got the shelter order, we really moved quickly to make sure that the customer experience, particularly in terms of how we do the customer support and getting all the telephone systems transferred over, because we do believe a customer should be able to call in and get a live person on the phone. And we ironed that out very quickly. and the company is performing well. And that's in large part, some of it's due to the nature of the business, but it's also the team was very adaptable. I do believe that, being together in the office and being able to talk in the office, and that's valuable. And I hope that we can get back to that at the right time.
Right. But, Twitter announced that they're going to let their people just work from home, period, full stop, which surprised everyone because the San Francisco landlords are shaking in their boots. The big office landlords like, wait a minute, you can't do that. You're going to start a trend here. And I'm kind of curious. There are employees that kind of don't want to travel. They like getting out of bed and, going to their computer and, they have to divide their day however they divide them. I mean, we're running a law firm doing it this way, but a lot of people think you can't run a law firm too long this way, particularly if you're going to try cases and get people ready for trial and that sort of thing. But some law firms are actually skinnying down their office space. They're saying we're going to have more of a hotel-based system where maybe we meet once or twice a week. You might as well have a WeWork then. Unfortunately, WeWork looks like it's going out of business, but it's almost like that works sufficiently, if it does.
Boy, I would be surprised, but who knows where this is going to go. I hope that's not the case.
Well,
I really think that.
Yeah. I mean, Stanford announced that they're going to do something completely different next year in terms of use of the lab because they're going to keep social distancing inside the biology labs and the like. I don't know what that means in terms of whether half of the delivery is going to be virtual or 3/4 or 80%. But the chancellor for the Cal State system said it's going to be about 80%. And he claimed it costs more. It actually costs more than running the facility. I found that a little hard to believe on PBS NewsHour yesterday. That's what he said. That's hard to believe.
It is, but who knows? I mean, I guess we can't be surprised. I never would have thought we'd be locked up at home for 2 months now. But
well,
here we are.
what's your thinking of the target return? Because it's still unclear to me. New York has now pushed it out to what looks like the middle of June. I'm claiming it might be the 4th of July with some view of true Independence Day is going to be July 4th, 2020 or July 5th.
It's originally Easter, but now it's going to be July 4th, right?
Right.
So I don't know. I think it really depends on the goal that's set, and the goalposts keep moving, and there's a lot of uncertainty.
Right.
And I think people, just talking from a data point of view, people have to know that whatever decision is made is going to be made without complete data. And there's trade-offs on both sides, and it's how you value, and Sweden's doing something else, and they may have fewer deaths over the long term, but more in the short term. And only in hindsight will we really know. And for sure, some of the people offering this is the way to do it right now are going to be correct. Just like, some monkeys, if you leave them long enough, could type out Shakespeare, or certain stock pickers wind up being correct in hindsight.
Right. So the last question I have for you, John, is what are you working longer hours now? Because I see emails from you at all times of the day and night. Are you actually putting longer time in?
I've always done email at night and at all hours. I would say I'm doing the same, and will continue doing so. But again, I'm looking forward to where I could be back interacting with people in the office.
Okay, John, it's good having you on. We're out of time, but we'll do another session when you get back, when the business gets back, and talk about kind of what hybrid models may come out of this. Thanks for spending your afternoon with us. I'll look forward to doing another one with you and get it on schedule and do it on a related topic.
Thank you very much. Jack.
Thanks for spending the time. So people can reach your business by going to friendfinder.com. Is that the main place?
FFN, like franknancy.com.
Okay, a good 3-letter acronym and a good expensive domain name that's probably itself worth billions, if not trillions.
We have thousands of domain names. Some of them you'd be surprised. But,
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Right,
a lot of one-word domain names.
Thanks very much. Have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Tune in next time on The Valley Current.